I was Oberleutnant zur Reserve Hans von Treskow, commander of 9th Company, 916th Grenadier Regiment, 352nd Infantry Division. 14 July 1944, the day the French would have celebrated the storming of the Bastille had anyone in Normandy still cared about calendars. We did not. We were too busy trying to stay alive in the bocage west of St. Lo, that green hell of chest-high stone-capped hedges, sunken lanes, and orchards where every field was a killing box and every apple tree hid a sniper. My company had landed on Omaha Beach on the 6th of June with 180 men. By Bastille Day we were 92, and 20 of those were barely able to walk. The rest were a patchwork quilt of the Reich. A dozen Saxons and Bavarians, a platoon of Hiwis, Russian volunteers who had decided that starving in a German uniform was marginally better than starving in a Soviet one, a section of ethnic Germans from the Banat, a squad of Polish volunteers who spoke better German than most of us, and one 17-year-old Sudeten boy who still believed the propaganda leaflets. We had 3 MG-42s, one with a cracked barrel, 4 MP-40s, a dozen captured Sten guns we didn't trust, and rifles in 4 different calibers. Ammunition was counted in magazines, not boxes. Food was horse stew and acorn coffee. The men slept in water-filled foxholes because the rain had not stopped for 13 days and 13 nights. The roads, if the words still had meaning, were gone. What had been cart tracks were now canals of liquid chalk. An Opel Blitz needed 30 men and 2 teams of oxen to move 50 meters before the axles snapped. We had abandoned our last 7.5 centimeter pack. 3 days earlier, the crew blew it up rather than let it sink forever into the mud. That night, I received a radio message from regimental headquarters. Hold at all costs. 2 SS Panzer Division Das Reich en route from Toulouse. I laughed so hard the signals officer thought I had cracked. Das Reich was still 300 kilometers away, burning the last of its fuel to reach us, while across the hedges the Americans received fresh divisions the way a banker receives interest. Around 2100, the rain eased to a steady drizzle. I was writing letters I knew would never be posted when the noise began. Not the usual thunder of artillery or the mosquito whine of yabos, but something new, a deep, continuous growl of hundreds of engines, the metallic crash of steel on steel, shouted orders in English, and, unbelievably, music. Swing music. Glenn Miller carried on the wind. I thought the exhaustion had finally driven me mad. I took my runner, Gefreiter Mahler, a former pickpocket from Wedding who could hear a patrol before it heard itself, and we crawled forward through the hedges. After an hour of belly crawling, we reached the edge of the old La Madeleine track. What I saw in the glare of dozens of floodlights still wakes me at night. Where yesterday a man could drown standing upright, 3,000 American engineers and pioneers worked like a single organism. Bulldozers shaved the surface mud into the ditches. Behind them came the supply trucks, row after row of GMC 2.5-ton Jimmies, each carrying enormous rolls of pierced steel planking, Marston mat, and square mesh track. One truck would break, soldiers would kick the tailgate, and the roll would unspool like a monstrous carpet, while a second truck followed with a sheep's foot roller to lock it down. Negro engineers from the 333rd and 343rd Engineer Regiments swung 16-pound sledgehammers in perfect cadence, driving stakes every 5 meters. The hammers flashed silver in the floodlights, rising and falling like some demonic orchestra. And over it all, the loudspeakers on the jeeps blared "In the Mood," the notes bouncing off the clouds. By 4:30 a.m., when the first pale light touched the east, the miracle was complete. 2 parallel steel highways, each 3 meters wide and already staked, graded, and cambered, stretched arrow straight for more than 4 kilometers through what had been a swamp. The surface rang like iron when the first jeeps tested it. And the traffic began immediately, an endless river of olive-drab vehicles nose to tail at 20 kilometers an hour, faster than we had moved in 2 weeks. tanks on trailers, self-propelled guns, ambulances, mobile kitchens, even a truck carrying a portable cinema screen. Dust rose in clouds where yesterday there had been only drowning mud. A captain in a jeep with white engineer insignia stopped directly below our hedge, stood on his seat, and shouted through a bullhorn in perfect, sarcastic German. "Guten Morgen, Kameraden. We just built you a first-class Autobahn. Care for a lift to Berlin? We're taking reservations." His men howled with laughter and threw chewing gum into our positions. I crawled back to the company command post numb. My adjutant, Lieutenant Weiss, a schoolteacher from Freiburg who had lost 2 fingers on the first day, met me with wide eyes. "They did it in 7 hours, Herr Oberleutnant. 7. Our pioneers estimated 3 weeks for a corduroy road half that length." Major Becker arrived 20 minutes later on a requisitioned French bicycle, his uniform black with mud to the waist. He dismounted, stared down the gleaming steel ribbons, removed his monocle, breathed on the lens, polished it with a handkerchief that had once been white, and replaced it. For a long time he said nothing. Then, very quietly, "Treskow, remember this morning. This is the day we lost the war, not in some dramatic Götterdämmerung, but here, in this cow pasture, to a nation that can unroll an Autobahn while we are still trying to find a dry match." At 5:45, the American barrage began heavier than anything we had yet experienced. Their guns no longer had to search for solid ground. They fired from the new road itself. At 6:15, the first Shermans rolled forward without once leaving the steel mats. By 8 o'clock, my forward platoons were overrun. By noon, we were fighting with bayonets and captured Thompson guns. By dusk, the remnants of 9th Company, 17 men, were stumbling rearward over the very highway the Americans had built on land we had defended with our blood the day before. I was captured 4 days later outside Saint-Lô. The Americans marched us along the road that now had directional signs, mile markers, and even a temporary PX selling Coca-Cola. Under my boots, the pierced steel rang like church bells. Ours. The American sergeant guarding us noticed me staring at the matting. He followed my gaze and grinned. "Hell of a thing, ain't it, sir? Back home we lay this stuff for county fairs. Normandy's just a bigger fair." I still have a small piece of that Marston mat. I picked it up on the march to the rear area cage and carried it through 5 years of prisoner camps. It sits in the top drawer of my desk in München, a square of rusted steel full of neat round holes. When people ask why I keep a scrap of junk, I tell them the truth. Because it is the real monument to our defeat. Not the ruins of the Reichstag, not the burned-out Panzer in the Tiergarten, but this anonymous piece of American ingenuity that turned Norman mud into a highway in a single night, while we slept in water-filled holes and waited for a miracle that never came. Their miracles arrived by convoy. Ours never left the drawing board.